Alright, welcome to the fifth part of my set review for Eternal. This time we're going over the Shadow faction. This will be the last faction. After that I will make one last video going over the multi-faction and factionless cards that are remaining. Alright, so let's start. First we have the Monument again. Amethyst Monument, or how you pronounce it. I think this is one of the weaker monuments. I think it's still better than the Fire Monument, which is in my opinion the worst. But it is questionable whether it's better or worse than the Green Monument in my opinion. The fact that it's only 3/3 and not 3/4 for example, like the Blue Monument, makes it a lot worse because it trades with basically all 3-drops and even a bunch of 2-drops, which makes the lifesteal often a one-time deal. Also doesn't block that many units efficiently, and Shadow is also not that great at enhancing units, which makes it harder to get this to a size where it can actually mess with bigger creatures and attack efficiently. So in Constructed this is definitely worse than in Limited. In Limited, a 3/3 lifesteal is still a fine deal. In Constructed, this is outclassed a lot more and a lot more often. Alright, next we have Blood Beetle, a pretty nice aggressive 1-drop. Basically, in Constructed, if you are looking for a hyper-aggressive shadow-based deck like Stone Scar Jiddo, this is a great 1-drop. Basically, if you can make sure that it connects once, you get a 2/2 flyer for 1, which is a great deal. Just have to make sure that your deck is capable of pushing this through often enough, because a 1/2 for 1 is not that great of a deal. And in Limited, basically the same applies. If you're having a very aggressive deck that has ways to give it evasion to trigger its Infiltrate, it's a pretty nice 1-drop. But in Limited, 1-drops in general are a bit less appealing because decks are less focused, games go longer, and this is not a good top deck. So be careful how high you pick this in Limited and if your deck can really benefit from it. Next we have Dark Return. This is a bit of a more interesting card, especially from a Magic player's perspective, because this card would be fairly bad in Magic normally, because Raise Dead effects are just not that great. You spend 1 mana, get sure you get your best unit that is in your void back to your hand, but you also basically pay 1 mana more for the same stats, which makes the stat to cost ratio of the unit a lot worth. This card already compensates that by adding a +1/+1 to the unit, more or less making up for the stat to cost discrepancy and keeping most of the stat to cost ratio, which makes this a lot better already. But another fact that makes that a lot better is that a lot of enhancement effects in this game are permanent. So if a unit, for example, had Infiltrate and had an Infiltrate trigger that adds battle skills and stats, like Blood Beetles for example, it will still be a 2/2 flying in the void. So if you return it, you have a 3/3 flyer that turns into a 4/3 flyer once it connects, which suddenly makes Blood Beetle a lot better. So basically you giving the Blood Beetle +2/+1 with the Dark Return rather than just +1/+1. And there's even better units where this applies more. And there's also ways like Haunting Scream that give a unit flying and charge, for example, and then you can return it with Dark Return, immediately attack in the air with the charge and the flying, and trigger the Infiltrate again. This is something that the Haunting Scream deck takes advantage of. So yeah, this card is surprisingly good even in Constructed, and obviously also pretty nice in Limited with all the mentioned interactions. Next we have Direfang Spider. Not particularly relevant and Constructed, but a pretty solid Limited pickup. This basically trades with the best non-flying, non-quick draw attacker of your opponent, which is a pretty good deal for 1 mana. So this is a pretty nice unit for a mid-range or control limited deck. Next we have Ghost Form. I think this card's basically terrible and unplayable in both formats. There's better ways to make your units connect, and this is just, yeah, you invest 1 power in a card for a pretty weak effect that is also only 1 time. Next we have Knife Jack. This is a pretty good aggressive 1-drop. Drawing multiples can be lackluster because of the 2 damage that you take, but a lot of the time that shouldn't matter too much in an aggressive deck, and if you have enough 1-drops you can maybe only run 3 to reduce the chance for diminishing returns. In limited, it's kind of the same thing as I mentioned. 1-drops are a bit weaker in limited because games tend to go longer than with focus decks and constructed. So this is kind of a bad draw later in the game. If your deck is really aggressive and can push its advantage really well, this is definitely one of the better 1-drops for a limited deck, though in my opinion, if it's aggressive enough. Next we have Pilfer. This is basically a cantrip that draws from the opponent's deck instead of your own, which I think is worse because while the influence requirements get removed, you basically still get a random card, and you get a random card that you yourself haven't put in your deck. So it might be either a bad card because your opponent made poor choices in deck building, or it might be a card that doesn't really help your strategy. So I rather just play a real card that I put in my deck instead of a cantrip that gives me a random card that is not from my own deck, where I basically have no control over the quality and utility of what I'm getting. I think this card is pretty bad in constructed and limited. Next we have Rapid Shot. This is a premium combat trick in constructed and limited. It's really great for aggressive constructed decks and great for aggressive and even not so aggressive limited decks. +4/+0 and quick draw basically beats most blockers in combat on most units. So this is really nice, and 1 power is a super efficient cost, just a great card. Sabotage, this is basically Eternal's Duress, and about as good as Duress is in Magic as well. Basically, in constructed, this can be an okay main deck card, but tendentially I think I'd rather have it as a sideboard card, because against aggressive decks, for example, this will miss a lot or only get like a low impact card in a lot of cases. So it's a bit situational and bad in certain matchups. So more of a sideboard card, and in limited this is in general just like unreliable, and decks are less focused, so the card you take usually matters less and is less critical to the opponent's strategy. And also the longer the game goes, they won't have any targets in hand anymore, so you draw this and it's a blank, so you down a card compared to your opponent and at a disadvantage. So rather just put a more flexible, generally useful card in your deck than a situational disruption card. Next we have Slumbering Stone, another conditional 1 mana 2/2 flyer basically. Depending on your deck, better or worse than Blood Beetle. In a very aggressive deck this is clearly worse than a Blood Beetle. In other decks this is a lot better, and it's also nice with various sacrifice synergies. So if you're looking into getting use out of some of your sacrifice effects, this is a great card for that. And even in constructed, if you can manage to build a good deck that is centered around sacrifice synergies like Dirkwood or Darkwood Beast and stuff like that, this is a premium 1-drop for that deck. It's also a nice protection against sweepers like Lightning Storm and Harsh Rule and stuff, because after they clear the board you are left with a 2/2 flyer to keep attacking again, which is nice. And in limited it's just generally a fairly good 1-drop. One of the better limited 1-drops, I would say. Next we have Suffocate. Basically Black's premium 1 mana removal. This is like the third best cheap removal in the game after Permafrost and Torch. A bit worse than those two, partially due to the fact that it's a spell and not a fast spell, but other than that it is pretty good. Just be aware that just like with Torch, if they pump the toughness against Torch, the unit survives. Here, if they manage to pump the attack above 3 of the unit, Suffocate doesn't kill the unit either, so it can be countered that way. Next we have Annihilate, basically just Shadow's premium 2-drop removal. This is a fast spell, which makes it even better, and while there is a couple of really powerful multi-faction units, especially in Constructed, that this doesn't kill, it still kills a lot of important cards that are a lot more expensive than this, like Sandstorm Titan for example, Impending Doom and so on. It is basically a Constructed and limited staple and an easy first pick in limited unless there's like a rare bomb or legendary. Next we have Argenport Instigator, one of the premium 2-drops in the entire game. 3/3 for 2 in a single faction is unprecedented. This is the only 3/3 for 2 that has a single faction. The other 2 power 3/3 is Champion of Glory, and that usually only is a 3/3 by turn 3 or 4, depending on what power sources you draw. And the ability is more of an upside than a downside usually, since you most of the time will be an aggressive deck if you play this, and then this ability punishes your opponent more than it does you for blocking and trading, so you even push more damage. This is just a stellar 2-drop for aggressive decks in any format. Next we have Cable Cutthroat. 2/2 lifesteal is nothing exciting, especially not in Constructed, but in Limited this is a pretty solid 2-drop, especially if you have ways to enhance it to gain more life and attack into bigger blockers. Next we have Dark Wisp. Usually not much of a Constructed card, can be situationally interesting in Constructed decks if you have sacrifice synergies for example and stuff like that, or just need ways to cycle through your deck. But more often than not this will not be relevant in Constructed. In Limited it's a fine filler for slower, more reactive decks, trades with small units, helps to double block and stuff, and enable sacrifice synergies. It's a fine card, nothing exciting, but a nice card to round out a non-aggressive draft deck for example. Next we have Devour. The card is usually not very good in Constructed in my opinion, because you play most of your units because they are good and you want them to live, so you're not interested in sacrificing them, especially since you already like spent a bunch of power on the unit and then you spend 2 more power to get rid of it, which will set you back tempo wise a lot. It is a fine counter to removal basically. If your opponent tries to kill your unit, you can just in response cast Devour, sacrifice it, draw 2 cards, so you basically get a free 2 power, draw 2, gain 2 out of this if the opponent would kill your unit anyway. And yeah, in Limited it can be situationally fine if you have enough good units to sacrifice and are more of like a grindy deck rather than an aggressive deck, but yeah, it's not a great card and more of a filler. Next we have Lesrai Ranger, basically a premium 2-drop, the premium common 2-drop in Shadow, great for Constructed aggressive decks and great for limited decks of most kinds. Even better if you have ways to enable it, since a 2 power 4/4 is really good and really annoying for your opponent and can generate so much pressure and tempo early on that it snowballs into a win. Next we have Scavenging Vulture, clearly not a Constructed card. In Limited I think the card is okay. You can usually just set up a trade early and then you have a 2/1 flyer for 2, which is not too bad, hitting for 2 a turn in the air, or trading with a 2 or 3 drop flyer of the opponent. If you're looking for some more 2-drops or some more evasion, this is an okay card to put in your limited deck in my opinion. It's not great, but it's a decent option. Flying is, after all, pretty good in limited. Next we have Sporefolk. This is basically not a good card unless you are very interested in filling up your void, which you most of the time won't be. There used to be a Reanimator deck in the beta that doesn't really exist and work the way it used to anymore, that played 4 of those in order to mill into its reanimation targets, for example. But currently this card is not very appealing for constructed or limited, but it might become interesting again in constructed if there is good synergies with this. In limited, I think you normally won't find good use for its summon trigger, and therefore a 2 power 1/2 is pretty bad. Next we have Vampire Bat. In my opinion, basically a worse Scavenging Vulture, because this stays a 1/1 for 2, which makes it a lot worse than Vulture. You get Lifesteal as a replacement, which I think is a lot worse than the conditional +1/+0 that the Vulture gets. But this can be fine if you have enough weapons to put on this, because then you can make the Lifesteal and the Flying matter and turn this into a really annoying threat that might win the game for you unanswered. Next we have Vara's Favor. One of the better, if not the best favors in my opinion, since deal 1 with Lifesteal basically means you drain 1 for 2, get a Shadow Sigil, and drain 1 can kill its fair share of units or finish off units after combat, which is pretty great. This is basically a staple in limited. I mean, it's not a first pick, but it's a pretty good pickup, especially if your deck is not super aggressive. And in constructed, this is a great tool for control decks and mid-range decks alike. And even some aggressive decks like Stonescar Burn play it, because it is a land that deals is a sigil that deals 1 damage, which is better than a sigil that deals 0 damage to the opponent if you're trying to burn them out, and also helps with removing early small blockers and stuff like that. Just all around a pretty good card. Next we have Venomfang Dagger. +1/+1 and deadly is definitely nothing you're looking for in constructed, and I think even in limited it's not that great, because basically if you put this on a unit and trying to take advantage of the deadly by blocking a bigger unit and trading, you're trading 2 cards for 1. Weapons are usually something that you put on a unit in order to deal more damage or stall bigger units, and getting deadly instead of more attack and toughness, attack and health does not really help with that. It only increases the chance of getting 2 for 1 by trading with a single card of the opponent. And yeah, just not a particularly great card in either format in my opinion for that reason. Next we have Amethyst Acolyte. This is basically a premium common in draft. Since the -1/-1 is permanent, unlike we are used to in Magic, this can shrink annoying blockers that is just a little too big and stalling you, or even kill smaller units, and you get a decent body that can trade with small units again out of it. So this has a lot of utility and potential for a 2 for 1, which is great. In constructed, this is it can even be fine in constructed due to the 2 for 1 value, but it's a lot more situational in constructed, and currently I wouldn't know a deck that I would want to put it in, but it's worth it to keep it in mind. It might be something that you're looking for against certain matchups or for the sideboard, stuff like that. Next we have Beastcaller's Amulet, basically a premium uncommon and limited, especially if you have a couple of 2-drop evaders or good 2-drop attackers that are hard to block for the opponent without jump blocking. And yeah, then you get a 5/5 Priest on turn 3, which can be pretty hard to beat for the opponent if they don't have a removal. And this is even constructed playable. There is like a Friendly Wisp Xenon deck, for example, that plays turn 2 Friendly Wisp into this thing, attack for 2, get a 5 beast, draw 2 cards, synergies like that. But yeah, there's no top level constructed deck right now that can make use of this. Next we have Blackguard Sidearm. It's a bit of a clunky weapon and definitely more of an offensive weapon, given that it only gives 1 health but gives quick draw. I would say it's probably decent. I'm not 100% sure still how I like to evaluate weapons in this game compared to how bad auras usually are in Magic. But here it's a bit less likely that you get 2 for 1 if you put a weapon on a unit than in Magic with auras, for example. But there still is a reasonable amount of getting 2 for 1 than losing a lot of tempo and card advantage. And yeah, I mean, definitely not a constructed card, but in limited it should be at least decent. I am not sure how much I like it though. Next we have Cable Countess. This is a really good 3-drop. Basically the ambush makes it very flexible, lets you usually at least get 1 attack in. 6/1 quick draw is very hard to efficiently block. Basically the opponent usually has to put 2 units in front of it and then lose at least 1. And it even fights through cards like an unenhanced Sandstorm Titan. Basically a constructed and limited staple. Next we have Desperado. This card is not that relevant in constructed because it's a bit situational. Your opponent even has to play units and they have to have either more than 1 unit, because otherwise yeah, they just trade and you don't get anything out of it. If they have never mind, that didn't make any sense. Let me start over. Basically, in constructed this is situational because the opponent even has to have units. If they don't have a unit, you cannot attack because the infiltrate triggers automatically, and if they have a unit they might as well just trade. So you basically need to give it evasion in order to kill the unit the opponent has. Otherwise it's just a 3-power 3/2. In limited this is fairly good if you have ways to enable it, since getting a 3/2 for 3 that kills your opponent's best unit on the next turn is pretty powerful and can swing games in your favor easily. Next we have Devouring Shadow. Usually not a constructed card. There's better removal, less conditional, cheaper, and that fast spell speed. But yeah, in limited, if your deck is shadow heavy enough, this is a pretty decent removal. Basically any decent removal in limited is welcome, and this is no difference and not even that bad. Next we have Direwood Beastcaller, basically a bomb in limited and in constructed. Constructed there's the Haunting Scream deck that builds around enabling this and connecting early on turn 3 or 4 usually to make 2 5/5s, which is still really powerful and annoying and hard to beat in constructed. And in limited this is even more brutal, so make sure to first pick this anytime you see it if you are in Shadow, especially in Shadow Primal. Next we have Execute. This is basically Assassinate in Eternal that also deals 2 damage. The fact that it deals 2 damage definitely makes it a lot better in aggressive decks than it is than Assassinate is in Magic. Plus, it's also worth noting that blocking, for example, exhausts units too. So you can Alpha Strike, they block one of your small guys with a bigger guy, and then you can execute it. So that also makes it a lot better in aggressive decks than these effects normally are. And in a non-aggressive deck, this is definitely even better because your opponent is attacking you, so he will exhaust his units and then you can kill them. So it's a pretty decent removal all in all in limited. In constructed you usually won't play a conditional 3-power removal like that because there's better, more flexible and cheap options that also are fast spells. Next we have Lesraya Nightblade. Clearly not a constructed card. In limited, this is fine. It's basically better than a 3 power 2/2 flyer. A pretty solid 3-drop in a more aggressive limited deck. Next we have Life Drinker. This is a kind of mediocre weapon. The fact that it only has 2 attack makes it very limited in what it can kill, but at least usually you won't lose any life killing something. Like, you're basically looking at a lot of the time breaking even on life or gaining 1 life or losing only 1 life rather than more life that you would usually lose with a weapon like this. So it's an okay weapon in limited and a terrible card in constructed. Relic weapon, sorry, not a weapon. Next we have Madness. This is basically Act of Treason, and it's black in this game rather than red as in Magic. And yeah, it's about as good as the effect is in Magic. If you have sacrifice synergies, for example, it's really nice. You can steal an opponent's unit, attack with them, and then sacrifice it to a Combust, for example. That's like the best card to pair this with, which is a nice combination in limited, especially given that Combust is a common. And there's a couple of other common sacrifice effects that this works with, which makes this really nice in a Stone Scar deck, for example, in limited. In constructed, this can be a nice sideboard card for aggressive decks. Taking a big blocker like a Sandstorm Titan will usually turn the game in your favor. In main decks this can also be interesting, especially with Combust and stuff, but more in like a sacrifice oriented deck, and there's not really a good one right now. I toyed around with one in closed beta for a while that was kind of nice, but there was also back when Madness was only 2 power and not 3 power. To be fair, 2 power was kind of ridiculous, and I'm glad they turned it into 3 power, which was much more reasonable. Next we have Plague. This is a fine card, basically mostly a sideboard card in constructed to deal with Jiddo decks and token decks and stuff. And in limited, this is a pretty solid card because it either kills your opponent's units or shrinks them so your units outclass theirs, which is pretty good. So yeah, this is quite a good limited card, I would say. Next we have Ravenous Thornbeast. Ravenous Thornbeast in constructed, once again, basically only interesting in like a very sacrifice synergy focused deck. Other than that, not a constructed card. In limited, this is a pretty good 2-drop, I think, especially if you have a couple of good sacrifice targets, like the Gargoyle. Then you can just play this on curve on turn 3, get a 3 mana 3 power 5/5, and even get some utility out of the sacrifice effect rather than it being a cost. Next we have Scheme. At first glance this might seem pretty bad to a Magic player because it's basically a 3 power impulse at sorcery speed, but given how limited the amount of like deck manipulation cards is in this game, this is actually much more valuable than it seems. And for example, the Haunting Scream combo aggro control hybrid deck usually plays 4 of these to find its pieces, and I've been fairly positively impressed with how solid the card is, because digging 4 cards deep is a decent amount. I just kind of wish it was a fast spell, at least, to be less awkward having to cast it in your turn, rather than waiting to see if you might need to kill something with a removal or get more information and then make your choice at the end of the opponent's turn. In limited, this is usually not that great unless you are a very focused control deck with a couple of really great cards to dig for, because 3 power is a huge investment and tempo is is much more important. If the decks are less focused, all that matters are like time and cards and stuff. So yeah, you will usually not have the time to cast this until like late in the game without setting you back too far. So a card that I rather leave on the bench in limited most of the time. Next we have Shadowlands Guide, a pretty sweet and efficient 3-drop. It is pretty vulnerable at 3-1, but the fact that it also gets you your best 1-drop from the void back is really powerful and makes this a nice 2-for-1. It is a staple in Shadow, Fire, and Stone Scar Jiddo decks, for example, and it's a really nice limited card if you have a bunch of 1-drops. Next we have Torrent of Spiders. This card is currently not very useful in constructed and kind of situational, but in limited this is pretty good, I think, because you always get a 1/1 deadly spider, which is already decent and will trade with a good ground attacker of your opponent, and a lot of the time you should be able to at least get a second, and maybe in the late game even a third, and in the late game drawing this and casting this for 3 deadly spiders can easily turn the game around for you, because suddenly your opponent has no good attacks anymore and all his units would trade with this one card. Next we have Xenon Destroyer, basically not a constructed card because it's just Reckless is bad, and a 3-power 3/3 with lifesteal is nothing that a constructed deck is looking for. In limited this can be an okay 3-drop if you have enough ways to make sure that it doesn't run into its own death into a bigger blocker with evasion and pump and stuff like that. Since a 3/3 lifesteal is a decent deal for 3 power if you can make it survive and steal you some life for multiple turns and pressure the opponent. Next we have Back Alley Bouncer. Not a constructed card for sure. Also not the greatest limited card, given that it trades with a lot of 3-drops and even some 2-drops. Units that basically trade down the curve are always not that great. But it's okay. On the other hand, if you're looking more into blocking 4 power, makes for a decent blocker in terms of trading with other 4-drops and maybe even 5-drops and stuff. But yeah, this is definitely more of a filler if you really need another unit, especially another 4-drop unit, but nothing that I'm excited to pick or put in my deck. Next we have Cable Recruiter. This is a pretty sweet and interesting card because it can generate a lot of tempo. The fact that it's a 1/4 basically makes sure that without help it won't trigger its infiltrate most of the time. But yeah, if you have ways to enable this, getting a 4-power 1/4 and a random unit from your opponent's deck basically is a pretty good deal in terms of card advantage and tempo. This even sees play in constructed sometimes in the Haunting Scream deck because it's a nice defensive unit that can generate value for you if you cast a Levitate on it or use Haunting Scream on it. Next we have Deathstrike, basically murder for 1 more in this game. This actually is better than it seems, since even though it costs 4, which would make this pretty mediocre in Magic, especially in Constructed, this is even good enough in Constructed just because of being a fast spell and unconditional, killing anything without asking questions is pretty valuable this early in Eternal, because there's not that many options, and usually other removal that is cheaper has its limitations, while this basically has none. So yeah, in limited, easy first pick. In constructed, still pretty good at 4 power. But keep in mind, 4 power is a lot, so if you're killing units in constructed that are cheaper than this, you are losing tempo. Next we have Impending Doom. Premium 4-drop, 5/5 flying for 4 is incredible. In Magic this is called Juzam Djinn, and I think Juzam Djinn doesn't even have flying if I remember correctly, and this one gets flying. The fact that it deals 1 damage to you at the end of your turn only means that you should end the game at some point and use this more for attacking than blocking, but that's probably what you're gonna do with a 5/5 flyer anyway, especially if it comes down that early. This card is just great in Constructed and Limited, easy first pick in Limited, and a great Constructed card. Next we have Lesrai Falchion. Lesrai Falchion is, in my opinion, basically unplayable in Constructed, because 5 power is a lot, and only giving 1 health makes it really likely that you're getting 2 for 1, and the card is kind of clunky. So usually you wouldn't want this in a Constructed deck. But in Limited, this is pretty good, because 4 attack is a lot. Lifesteal is really great in a race, so if you have a good evasive attacker to put this on, this can easily win the game for you, if the opponent has no answer for it. But be careful to not get blown out and get 2 for 1 easily and play around things that can punish you. Next we have Soul Collector. This card can be situationally interesting once again for the sacrifice theme. As you can see, there's usually some kind of theme going through each faction. In Justice Primal there were the like flyer aggro type cards that only make sense in this. Here it's the sacrifice synergies, especially in conjunction with the fire faction. So yeah, in Limited this is okay. The problem is it's a 4 power 1/1, so the turn you play it, it basically has no impact, and it takes a while to get active. There's usually better 4-drops, but if your deck has some sacrifice synergies and removal, it's a fine card at least to put into your deck, because it can grow out of hand. But it might look better to some people than it is, because your 4-drop basically being non-existent for a turn or two can really cost you in terms of tempo. Next we have Steward of the Past. This is another premium 4-drop, really great, 3/5, deadly, makes this a great blocker, survives a lot of attackers, kills everything that it blocks thanks to deadly. The ability is really nice at suppressing graveyard void synergies, which makes this premium sideboard card against Haunting Scream decks, for example, and just a pretty good defensive creature in mid-range and even control decks potentially, thanks to the defensive stats combined with deadly. And yeah, in Limited this is just a premium 4-drop that you can first pick over most commons and uncommons. Next we have Stonescar Magus. Once again, we know similar cards from Magic, but this one is a lot better than the Magic versions, because the Magic versions give -2/-2 until end of turn. This gives a permanent -2/-2, basically making it trade with any 4 health or less unit, or trading with a 2 health unit and killing another 1 or 2 health unit, which is really nice, gives you a nice card advantage, and it's also a nice unit to use on sacrifice effects to choose when and where to use the -2/-2. A pretty solid Limited card, but usually not a Constructed card. Next we have Subvert. A pretty bad card in my opinion. First of all, it's a spell, which means you have to waste 4 power on your turn before you know what your opponent's going to do on an effect that has no impact on the board at all. And then you only get a random card from the opponent's hand, which is pretty terrible. Even if you would be able to choose a card from the opponent's hand, it would still be problematic, because 4 power is so much for that effect. But the fact that it's a random card makes this card terrible in both formats. I would never touch this card. Next we have Ashara the Deadshot. Clearly not a Constructed card, but a 6/3 deadly quick draw. Is a pretty good threat in Limited. The 3 health makes it a bit vulnerable to stuff like Torch and so on, but the fact that it has quick draw and deadly basically makes the opponent having to block with 7 units that can deal 3 or more damage, which is nearly impossible. So basically the opponent will need removal to stop her, otherwise she will just win the game, which is pretty impressive. So a great limited card. Next we have Grasping at Shadows, basically your typical Rise from the Dead effect. Returns a unit from the void. Was used to be a key card in the Self-Mill Primal Shadow Reanimator deck, but now that this deck is no longer viable, that card currently doesn't really have any uses. But yeah, it's a unique effect that might come in handy down the road in Constructed. I think in Limited this is not very good, because paying 5 for the effect means that there has to be a really good unit in a void to return. Be aware this also works on the opponent's void, so if they have a better unit than you have, feel free to take it. Next we have Lurking Sangua. This card is really powerful in my opinion. It costs 5 at first glance, but usually it will cost 0, and a 4/2 lifesteal for 0 is incredibly powerful, especially in Stone Scar, Jiddo aggro decks where you can play a turn 1 Grenade in, get the 2 tokens, attack on turn 2 with bows. When you're on the play, opponent has no blocker, and there you go. Free 4/2 lifesteal on turn 2 plus your 2-drop or 2 1-drops, and suddenly your opponent is facing a whole army before he even got to his second turn. This is just a fairly broken card in my opinion, if you can build your deck to abuse it. And in Limited it's still a pretty solid card, even if you have to hardcast it later in the game, but it's not that great because it's a lot harder to trigger it, enable it early. But it's okay, it's not an unplayable Limited card. Next we have Merciless Stranger. Once again, another Stranger, we've seen plenty so far. 5 power, 3/3, not too great. The fact that it has Deadly makes it so that it could also just be cheaper in a 1/1, like the 1 power 1/1 Deadly Spider that we saw earlier. So the only thing that the 3/3 does here is that it is a little harder to kill with cheap burn spells like Vara's Favor, and that it can actually attack into bigger blockers that don't want to block it, to deal 3 damage, where the Spider would only deal immediately 1 damage, because the opponent usually won't want to block it. But yeah, as a defensive unit, I rather have the 1 mana 1/1 Deadly than a 5 mana 3/3 Deadly. And the fact that you might also give an opponent's Stranger Deadly is terrible. All in all, not a pretty good card in Limited, and in Constructed a very situational and one of the weaker Strangers for a multicolor Stranger deck. Next we have Oblivion Spike. This is a potential, although a bit situational, bomb in Limited. Basically in the late game this can kill multiple units of your opponent and really clean up nicely for you, or pressure the opponent on an empty board. In Constructed, this can be a situationally interesting card for control decks. Oh no, not for control decks, because it's units in your void. So yeah, in Constructed, I don't know how useful this is. Might be interesting in an aggro deck in the sideboard against a control deck that has few units, because they will kill your units, fill up your void, and won't have a unit that you have to attack with the relic weapon, so you can just equip this and hit them in the face for a lot, and they have to try and get rid of the 5 armor weapon that doesn't even die to the I think Thunderstrike it is, the 2 power deal 4 to an attacker. So yeah, it's an interesting card for Constructed, at least I would say, and in Limited a situational bomb. Next we have Umbran Reaper. This is basically a bomb in Limited, 5 power evader that drains for 5 is incredible. And in constructed, this is still really good because you get an effect even if the opponent kills it right away, and the effect of Drain 5 is really great even in aggro matchups because it helps a lot with racing. And yeah, this is a really annoying threat in constructed. Next we have Argenport Ringmaster. This is clearly a limited bomb. 6 power, 5/5 is decent stats. The infiltrate more or less says you win the game, and there's plenty of ways to make this connect in order to actually win the game. In constructed this is not too great, but the effect is so powerful that it can even be interesting in constructed. I've seen some people experiment with it, but 6 power is still a lot, and it dies to quite a bunch of removal, so they might just kill it without having any effect on the game, and then you paid 6 power and they killed it with like an Annihilate for 2 power, for example, and suddenly you are down for 4 power in tempo. So yeah, in constructed, not that appealing, but maybe someone finds a good use for it. Next we have Direwood Rampager, a limited only card, and even a limited 4 health on a 6-drop is pretty lackluster because it will trade down the curve most of the time when it attacks. Next we have Horse Snatcher Bat, a pretty solid 6-drop in limited. In constructed, this once again is not a relevant card, but in limited 5 power evader for 6 is pretty good, and if it has dead draw, even better. This is a premium 6-drop in limited, which is nearly impossible to block. There's not many units that have flying and have more than 5 health that can safely block this. So this is a really good flying attacker in limited. Next we have Spirit Drain, usually not a card in constructed. In limited it's not great, but it's a solid removal. It usually only kills things that are cheaper than itself, which is basically compensated for by the fact that it gains you life to make up for some of the tempo loss. 6 is still pretty costly for removal that doesn't kill the premium units in the game a lot of the time. But yeah, if your deck is slower and looking for some more removal and ways to gain life to stabilize, this might be a fine card. The more aggressive your deck is, the worse this gets, clearly. Next we have Whispers in the Void. In constructed, this is currently not a relevant card. There's just better cards at 6 power that do similar things in a more powerful fashion, but in limited this is really annoying and can be considered kind of a bomb, because getting a 1/1 each turn that also deals a damage to the opponent if it dies can get out of hand quickly in a limited game. But the fact that you have to spend your entire 6th turn on casting it and don't get an effect right away might also cost you the game in terms of tempo, so this is only interesting in a deck that has a good early game defense and stabilize the board basically, and then plays this in order to build an advantage and overwhelm the opponent. Next we have a Zindal's Gift. This card is somewhat mediocre in my opinion, since 7 power is a lot for that effect, especially given that by this point a lot of opponents will have few to no cards left in their hand, so it doesn't even do anything a lot of the time. In limited this is even worse. In constructed you can at least use it in your sideboard against other slower decks. Like if you're a control deck and play against another control deck or a slower mid-range deck, this might be an interesting card to get card advantage and turn the game around and break the game basically. But yeah, very situational card that is very terrible in terms of tempo and slow and clunky. Choose with caution. Next we have Venom Spine Hydra, a pretty good 7-drop in limited. in Constructed this usually is too unreliable, too situational. You have to have a way to kill it in order to trigger its effect, otherwise it's just a 7 for 7, which some opponents might attack through or over or whatever. In the reanimated deck this was potentially interesting because you could reanimate it and then kill it somehow to wipe the opponent's board without having to be Justice and getting access to Harsh Rule. But yeah, in Constructed currently not very good. In Limited, a nice card for slower decks. Next we have Touch of the Umbran. In Constructed, maybe interesting as like a one-off in a control deck or as a sideboard option for slow matchups, like in mid-range on mid-range matchups where it's grindy and you use this on their best remaining unit to turn the game around and win with it. For example, that's a pretty huge swing, and the lifesteal makes it even easier to win the race after. In Limited, this is basically a bomb. 8 power is a lot, but if you cast this, that will usually win you the game. Next we have Vara the Fate Touched, one of the better 8 power legends in my opinion, and usually the reanimation target of choice for the reanimator deck, since first of all the 6/6 deadly is not too shabby. If there's something bigger on the board, it she at least trades with it, but she's not that great of an attacker usually. Her value really comes from her ability. Basically, if she survives, she will win you the game, because you just keep drawing into units, play them, reanimate more units from the void, and just get so much board and card advantage that it will overwhelm your opponent. Next we have Last Word. This card is pretty weird. It's pretty clunky. In Limited, if your deck is slow and controlling, you might make good use of it. You have to make sure that you have enough defense so the opponent cannot simply attack you and destroy Last Word. In Constructed, there's like Felon Control that sometimes plays it, but yeah, it's like it dies to Avara's favor basically, and Caleb's favor and stuff like that. There's so many cards that kill this and punish you before you even can use the ultimate to try to kill the opponent, and then the opponent also has to not have a unit left in order to kill them with it. Not a very reliable card in Constructed, but in Limited it can be pretty broken if the opponent has no hand cards anymore, which is often the case that late in the game, to kill it, and then you have like blockers that stall the opponent's unit and this picks them off one by one. But 9 power is a lot, so your deck has to be really slow and defensive to get there. And last but not least, we have the Witching Hour. This used to be a Constructed staple before it got changed. Now it's just takes too long to make this cheap enough to cast. So in Constructed this doesn't really see much play anymore, because there's better cards like Shimmer Pact that do the same thing, cheaper and more reliable and more efficient. In Limited, I think games usually don't go long enough and the decks are not big enough, or like the decks are not set up well enough to take advantage of this. I think even in Limited this is usually not good enough. Correct me if I'm wrong, maybe. It is just barely good enough to jam into like a very controlling or grindy slow mid-range deck as a win condition down the road, but you have to do a lot of things until this gets cheap enough to realistically be castable. Alright, so that's it with for the Shadow faction this time. Next time we will talk over the rest. As usual, if you enjoyed the review, found this either or interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel for future Eternal and Magic content. And if you have any suggestions for future videos or questions regarding the review, or disagree with some of my assessments, let me know in the comments to start some discussion. I always read all my comments and reply to every single one of them. So thanks for watching, see you next time.